Okay, so, um, ready to get a little dark today?
Always.
Well, good, because today we're going deep on Patrick Kearney.
The trash bag killer.
Yeah, that's the one. And just to be clear up front, we've got Kearney's Wikipedia page pulled up
A classic
for
source.
sure.
hmm
So we're going to try to get inside Kearney's head, figure out his MO,
Yeah.
his victims, the whole deal.
I think what makes Kearney's case particularly fascinating is he was active during a time when California had a lot of these freeway killers.
Right, like a cluster of them.
Exactly. And even among that group, Kearney stands out.
So let's start at the beginning, right? What can we learn about his early life from the Wikipedia page?
Well, it paints a pretty bleak picture. He was born in 1939, a sickly kid prone to getting bullied, and apparently he retreated into some disturbing fantasies.
Yeah, and I mean, you see that with a lot of serial killers, this kind of,
Troubled childhood.
yeah, exactly, like a sense of powerlessness or vulnerability that gets twisted into this need for control.
Absolutely.
It's a classic pattern, it
It
seems.
really is.
So the page even mentions things like bestiality at age 13 and fantasies of killing and skinning people.
It's disturbing stuff.
For sure.
Right.
But then he goes and gets married for a bit, gets a job as an engineer at Hughes Aircraft.
Right.
Like you almost forget what we just talked about.
Yeah, it's like this weird compartmentalization that some experts talk about. The ability to function in society, even excel professionally while hiding these dark urges.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that, we have to factor in that Kearney was pretty active in the gay community,
Yeah.
spoke fluent Spanish, and used that to connect with partners in San Diego and Tijuana,
Adds another layer to his profile.
for sure. Does it make you wonder about those relationships, though? Like, what were those dynamics like?
I think it's a valid question. Unfortunately, the Wikipedia page doesn't go too deep into that aspect of his life.
Yeah, that's too bad. Okay, so let's talk about his early killings. The source says they started around 1962 with a hitchhiker in Orange, California.
Interesting that he started with a hitchhiker, someone who might not be immediately missed.
Yeah, targeting transients makes sense in a way. Less risk,
Exactly.
less chance of raising immediate alarms.
Right.
So then in 1967, Kearney moves to Redondo Beach with his lover David Hill.
Right.
And the page mentions that arguments with Hill often led to Kearney taking these solitary drives that ended in murder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like the arguments were a trigger,
Yeah, like a release valve almost.
pushing him over the edge into this cycle of violence. It's a pretty chilling thought.
It is.
But then things get even worse in 1974.
How so?
Well, the murders become way more frequent, almost happening every month.
Wow.
But his MO stays consistent.
Really?
Yeah, he sticks with a .22 caliber pistol, delivering quick and efficient kills.
That's interesting. It sets him apart from some of those other freeway killers who are into more sadistic torture.
Right, his focus seemed to be more on the act itself.
It's almost more chilling in a way.
Yeah, and then to make it even more disturbing, he also engaged in necrophilia and post-mortem mutilation.
Oh, wow. So not just about the kill itself.
No, and what's really unsettling is that the page suggests this wasn't driven by sadism.
Really?
Yeah, apparently Kearney himself claimed it was more about curiosity.
That's even more disturbing in some ways. The need to control even after death, the fascination with the human body as an object. It's a whole other level of messed up.
It really is,
It makes you wonder what was going on in his mind.
for sure. So speaking of his MO, let's get into the specifics. Kearney was very meticulous in his approach. He would pick up victims, shoot them in the temple while they were in the passenger seat, dispose of the bodies along freeways or in remote areas, often dismembered and wrapped in trash bags.
Hence the nickname.
Exactly. And he took steps to avoid detection draining blood, bathing the bodies to get rid of evidence.
Wow, he really had a system.
He did. And there's this one detail from the Wikipedia page that just sends chills down my spine. Apparently, a grocery store owner noticed that Kearney would frequently buy butcher knives and really scrutinize them.
Oh, God.
Can you imagine being that grocery store owner?
Not a clue.
Totally oblivious to the darkness behind those purchases.
Right, like evil hiding in plain sight. It's one of the things that makes Kearney's case so unsettling.
For sure. You never know what's lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly.
And as if all that wasn't bad enough, the page also mentions that Kearney had child victims.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it just adds this whole other level of horror to the story.
I mean, preying on children, the most vulnerable among us, it really points to a deep depravity.
No question. The youngest victims named on the page are Ronald Dean Smith, who was only 5,
Oh, my God.
and Merle Hondo Chance, who was just 8 years old when he was murdered.
It's hard to even comprehend.
I know, and the source doesn't offer many details about those specific cases.
Yeah,
but
right.
just the fact that they happened is awful enough.
It's important to remember that behind these names were real children, with families who loved them. We can't lose sight of the human cost.
Absolutely. The page does name a few other victims, though, like 13-year-old Michael Craig McGee. And what's crazy is that Kearney actually told the police exactly where to find McGee's remains.
Really?
Yeah, he'd scattered them in some remote area, but he gave them detailed instructions.
Wow. That's just...
I know. It's like this weird need for control even after death.
It's creepy. So if he was so meticulous about getting rid of the bodies, why did he get caught?
Well, that's where things get interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The source says that 17-year-old John Otis LeMay ended up being Kearney's final victim.
Okay.
And his body was actually found near a freeway on-ramp.
So not as hidden.
Right. And that turned out to be a crucial mistake because LeMay had told his neighbor that he was going to meet a Dave at a certain address. And that address was Kearney's place.
Oh, wow. So they were already on his radar.
Exactly. And the Dave that LeMay mentioned was actually David Hill, Kearney's lover.
That's a crazy coincidence.
It really is. And here's another detail that the source highlights. The police actually visited Kearney's home while they were investigating LeMay's disappearance.
No way.
Yeah, they were literally at his doorstep.
But they didn't know?
Nope. And get this visit happened before the murder of Merle Chance.
Who was his last known victim?
Exactly. It's like they were so close to catching him, but
Just missed him.
yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
So once they connect Kearney and Hill to LeMay's murder, they issue arrest warrants. And they skip town. They flee to El Paso.
So they went on the run.
They did. But in the end, it wasn't the police who brought them down.
Yeah.
It was family pressure.
Really?
Yeah, the source says that family pressure led to Kearney and Hill surrendering to the authorities in July of 1977.
Wow. Imagine being their family.
I know, it must have been a horrifying
To
situation.
know that your loved one is a serial killer
Exactly. And then to have to make the decision to turn them in?
must have been incredibly difficult.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, the source emphasizes that Hill was cleared of any involvement in the murders. Kearney acted alone.
Right. Good to know that.
Yeah. So Kearney ends up confessing, and initially he admits to 28 murders.
28.
Yeah. And then later on, he confesses to 7 more.
Oh,
It's a staggering number. He eventually pleads guilty to 21 counts to avoid the death penalty.
so he was playing the system even then?
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And the police suspected he was responsible for even more murders, but they just didn't have enough evidence to press charges.
That's so frustrating.
It really is.
Yeah.
So as of 2022, Kearney is serving out his life sentences at Mule Creek State Prison. So wow, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From his childhood to his MO to his capture,
To take in.
it really is. What stands out most to you about Kearney? Like if you had to boil it down to one key takeaway.
For me, it's the duality of it all. Like on the surface, this guy had a normal life, a job, a relationship, but underneath it all.
He was a monster.
Exactly. And it just goes to show that you can never really know what's going on inside someone's head.
It's terrifying to think about how many other Patrick Kearneys are out there living seemingly ordinary lives.
Right. Blending into society.
And we never suspect a thing.
It makes you question your own judgment, Like we try to categorize people based on appearances, but...
Yeah. Appearances can be deceiving.
Exactly. Kearney's case proves that.
It does. It also makes you wonder if anything could have been done differently. Were there any missed opportunities to stop him?
Well, there was that near miss with the police showing up at his house.
Right, while they were investigating LeMay's disappearance.
What if they had dug a little deeper?
Or even that grocery store owner who saw Kearney obsessing over the butcher knives.
It's easy to write those things off as just weird.
But in hindsight, they seem like huge red flags.
It's a good reminder to trust your gut, If something feels off.
Yeah. And to speak up, don't be afraid to share your concerns with someone.
Absolutely. If that grocery store owner had said something, or if LeMay's neighbor had gone to the police sooner, maybe things would have turned out differently.
We'll never know. But it does highlight how important it is to be aware of your surroundings and to look out for each other.
For sure. We all have a role to play in keeping our community safe.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, is there anything else you want our listeners to consider?
I guess just the idea that evil can be very ordinary. It can be hiding in plain sight.
So don't be naive.
Right. But don't live in fear either. Just be aware.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Patrick Kearney. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.